Hey guys, very good morning. Today we are going to discuss book Numbers. Introduction. Title. The English name of the book comes from the Septuagint and is based on the census list found in chapter 1 verse 26. The Hebrew title of the book, In the Desert, is more descriptive of its contents. Numbers presents an account of the 38-year period of Israel's wandering in the desert following the establishment of Covenant of Sinai. Author and date. The book has traditionally been ascribed to Moses. This conclusion is based on point 1, statements concerning Moses' writing activity, and second one, the assumption that the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch or Unit 10, come from one author. Author and date of writing, and when you have seen in Genesis. It is not necessary, however, to claim that Numbers came from Moses' hand, complete and in final form. Portion of the book were probably added by scribes or editors from later periods of Israel's history. For example, the protestation of the humility of Moses would hardly be convincing if it came from his own mouth, but it seems reasonable to assume that Moses wrote the essential content of the book. Contents. Numbers relates the story of Israel's journey from Mount Sinai to the plains of Moab on the border of Canaan. Much of its legislation for people and priests is similar to that in Exodus, Leviticus and Deuteronomy. The book tells of the murmuring and rebellion of God's people and of their subsequent judgment. Those whom God had redeemed from slavery in Egypt and with whom he had made a covenant at Mount Sinai responded not with faith, gratitude and obedience but with unbelief, ingratitude and repeated acts of rebellion, which come to extreme expression in their refusal to undertake the conquest of Canaan. The community of the redeemed forfeited their part in the promised land. They were condemned to live out their lives in the desert. Only their children would enjoy the fulfillment of the promise that had originally been theirs. Theological teaching. In telling the story of Israel's desert wanderings, Number offers much that is theologically significant. During the first year after Israel's deliverance from Egypt, the nation entered into covenant with the Lord at Sinai to be the people of his kingdom, among whom he pitched his royal tent, the tabernacle. This is the story of Exodus. As the account of Numbers begins, the Lord organizes Israel into a military camp. Leaving Sinai, they march forth as his conquering army, with the Lord at the head, to establish his kingdom in the promised land in the midst of the nations. The book graphically portrays Israel's identity as the Lord's redeemed covenant people and its vocations as the servants people of God, charged with establishing his kingdom on earth. God's purpose in history is implicitly disclosed: to invade the arena of fallen humanity and effect the redemption of his creation, the mission in which his people are also to be totally engaged. Numbers also presents the chastening wrath of God against his disobedient people because of their rebellion and especially the nation's refusal to undertake the conquest of Canaan. Israel was in breach of covenant. The 4th book of the Pentateuch presents a sobering reality. The God who had entered into covenant with Abraham, who had delivered his people from bondage in the Exodus, who had brought Israel into covenant with himself as his treasured possession, and who had revealed his holiness and the gracious means of approaching him, was also a God of wrath. His wrath extended to his errant children as well as to the enemy nations of Egypt and Canaan. Even Moses, the great prophet and servant of the Lord, was not exempt from God's wrath when he disobeyed God, which regards his error begins with the notice of Miriam's death and concludes with the record of Aaron's death. Here is the passing of the old God, Those whom God has used to establish the nation are dying before the nation has come into its own. The questions arise, is God finished with the nations as a whole? When you look at Romans chapter 11 verse 1, we can understand the statement, this question, or is promise a thing of the past? Is one of the most remarkable sections of the Bible, the account of Balaam, the pagan diviner. The reply is given. The Lord working in a way, chapter 22 to 24, we can see the reply is given. The Lord working in a providential and direct way proclaims his continued faithfulness to his purpose for his people despite their unfaithfulness to him. Balaam's Moab's answers to Moses, the man of God. He is an internationally known prophet who shares the pagan belief that God of Israel is like any other deity who might be manipulated by acts of magic or sorcery. But from the early part of the narrative, when Balaam first encounters the one true God in visions, and in the narrative of the journey on the donkey, when look at chapter 22, he begins to learn that dealing with the true God is fundamentally different from anything he has ever known. When he attempts to curse Israel at the instigation of Balak, king of Moab, Balaam finds his mouth unable to express the curse he desires to pronounce. Instead, from his lips come blessings on Israel and curses on its enemies. In his 7 prophetic oracles, Balaam proclaims God's great blessings for his people. Though the immediate enjoyment of his blessings will always depend on the faithfulness of his people, the ultimate realization of God's blessing is sure. Because of the character of God, thus Numbers reaffirm the ongoing purposes of God. Despite his judgment on his rebellious people, God is still determined to bring Israel into the land of promise. His blessings to Israel rest in his sovereign will. The teaching of the book has lasting significance for Israel and for the church. God does display his wrath even against his errant people, but his grace is renewed as surely as the drawn, and his redemptive purpose will not be thwarted. Special problem. The large numbers of men conscripted into Israel's army have puzzled many interpreters. The numbers of men mustered for warfare seems to demand a total population in excess of 20 lakhs. Such numbers appear to be exceedingly large for the times, for the desert wanderings, and in comparison with the inhabitants of Canaan. When you look at chapter 3 verse 43. Various possibilities have been suggested to solve this problem. Some have thought that the numbers may have been corrupted in transmission. The present next, however, does not betray textual difficulties with the numbers. Others have felt that the Hebrew word for 1,000 might have a different meaning here from its usual numerical connotation. In some passages, for example, the word is technical term for a company of men that may or may not equal. Further, some have postulated that this Hebrew word means sheep. When you look at Genesis 36:15, we can understand. In this way, the figure 53,400 would mean 53 sheep plus 400 men. Such a procedure would yield a greatly reduced total, but it would be at variance with the fact that the Hebrew text adds the thousands in the same way it adds the hundreds for a large total. Also, this would make the proportion of sheep to fighting men top heavy, 59 sheep for 300 men in Simeon. Another option is to read the Hebrew word for 1,000 with a dual meaning of sheep, and 1,000 with the sheep numbering one less than the stated figure. For example, the 46,500 of Reuben. When you look at chapter 1 verse 20 is read as 45 sheep and 1,500 fighting men. The 59,300 of Simeon. When you look at chapter 1 verse 23 is read as 58 sheep and 1,300 fighting men, etc. But in this case, as in the former, the totals of chapter 1 verse 46 and chapter 2 verse 32 must then be regarded as errors of understanding, perhaps by later scribes. Still, another approach is to regard the numbers as symbolic figures rather than as strictly mathematical. The numerical value of the Hebrew letters in the expression the Israel community equals 603. The number of thousands of the fighting men, chapter 1 verse 46, the remaining 550 plus 1 for Moses, might come from the numerical equivalent of the Hebrew letters in the expression all the men who are able to serve in the army, chapter 1 verse 3. The symbolic use of the numbers called gematria is not unknown in the Bible, but it is not likely in number where there are no literary clues pointing in the direction. While the problem of the large numbers has not been satisfactorily solved, the Bible does point to a remarkable increase of Jacob's descendants during the 4 centuries of their sojourn in Egypt. With all their difficulties, these numbers also point to the great role of providence of miracles in God's dealing with these people during their life in the desert. Outline. Structure. The book has 3 major divisions based on Israel's geographical locations. Each of the 3 divisions has 2 parts, as the following a breakdown demonstrates. First one is Israel at Sinai, preparing to depart for the land of promise, and followed by the journey from Sinai to Kadesh. Second one is Israel at Kadesh, delayed as a result of rebellion, followed by the journey from Kadesh to the plains of Moab. Third one is Israel on the plains of Moab, anticipating the conquest of the land of promise. So here we can discuss some Israel at Sinai, preparing to depart from the promised land, chapter 1, and the commands for the census of the people, chapter 1 to 4 we can see. Total chapters, here we can find 36 chapters. Total 36 chapters. Now we are discussing outlines. Israel, first chapter, chapter 1 to 10, we can see Israel at Sinai, preparing to depart for the promised land. Under that we can discuss the commands for the census of the people, the numbers of men from each tribe mustered for war, the placement of the tribes around the tabernacle and their order for march, the placement of the Levites around the tabernacle and the numbers of the Levites at the firstborn of Israel, and the numbers of the Levites in their tabernacle service for the Lord, the commands for purity of the people, the test for purity in the law of jealousy, the Nazirite vow and the Aaronic benediction, the offering of the 12 leaders at the dedications of the tabernacle, the setting up of the lamps and the separation of the Levites, the observance of the Passover, the covering cloud and their silver triumphs, the journey from Sinai to Kadesh, from chapter 10 to verse 12. Under that we will discuss the beginning of the journey, the beginning of the sorrows of fire and Quali, the opposition of Miriam and Aaron, chapter 12. And chapter 13 to 20 we will see Israel at Kadesh, the delay resulting from rebellion. Under that we will discuss the 12 spies and their mixed report of the good land, the people's rebellion against God's commission and their defeat, a collection of laws and offerings, the Sabbath and tassels and garments, the rebellion of Korah and his allies, the budging of Aaron's staff, a sign for rebels, concerning priests, their duties and their support, chapter 18. Chapter 19, the red heifer and the cleansing water, and chapter 20, the sin of Moses. Chapter 22, the journey from Kadesh to the plains of Moab. Under that we will discuss the resistance of Edom, the death of Aaron, the destruction of Arad, the bronze snake, the song of the well and the journey to Moab, the defeat of Sihon and Og, Israel returns to Moab. Chapter 22 to 32 will discuss Israel on the plains of Moab in anticipating of taking the promised land. Balak of Moab hires Balaam to curse Israel. Balaam blesses Israel in 7 oracles. The Baal for pure and Israel's apostasy. Chapter 26, the second census, and chapter 27 to 30, instructions for the new generation, and under that we will discuss the inheritance for women, the successor to Moses, commands regarding offering, commands regarding festivals, commands regarding vows, war against Midian, chapter 31, chapter 32, the settlement of the Transjordan tribes, and chapter 33 to 36, appendixes dealing the various matters. Under that we will discuss chapter 33, the stages of the journey, and the land of inheritance, chapter 34 and 35. Chapter 36, the last one, the inheritance for women. So these 36 chapters we will discuss in our regular Bible study, chapter by chapter. God bless you. Thank you.